Hello, everyone. I am Liliana Śmiech, Director of Public Relations of Warsaw Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Warsaw Institute event. We're honored today to host Tomasz Grzywaczewski, journalist, author, and expert in Central and Eastern Europe, and Jan Hernik, journalist, publicist, editor-in-chief, and expert of Warsaw Institute. Good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
Hello, everyone.
Our today's discourse will primarily focus on talks between delegations from the United States and Russia that started this Monday in Geneva and whether they have made any significant changes to the reality. Well, we can clearly observe that Russia has been building up its military presence at its border with Ukraine in recent months. However, tensions have risen greatly since Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. What would you say, Tomasz, was the highlight that spilled over frosty relations between the US and Russia?
First of all, I think this is very important to notice that the demands of Russia are rather unacceptable for the US. Even the minimum demands, as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Rabkov, claims that NATO must guarantee Russia that it will not enlarge to the east, which means that Ukraine and Georgia are not going to be accepted to NATO in any time in the future. And the second thing is that without the consent of Russia, no NATO soldiers can be deployed to the eastern flank of NATO, clearly speaking to the Central European countries. Actually, it means that NATO as a military alliance will not be fully operative, and we as the Central Europe will lose the security guarantees from our Western partners. So these demands are of course, impossible to accept by neither White House nor the whole NATO. So the first question is why to start negotiations from the point in which we know that it will finally bring us to the stalemate. So in my opinion, first of all, the first small success of Russia is that it forced NATO to start these negotiations. By force, I'm thinking about taking in Ukraine as a hostage in this game, because in fact the US didn't want to negotiate over Russian demands. Let me remind that in summer there was a meeting between President Biden and President Putin, and it was announced, maybe not a very successful one, but at least some kind of a good beginning for a new talks between the US in Russia. It was like this small ray of hope, and actually after a few months we find ourselves in the reality in which Russia is threatening, is intimidating West, and West has no other option but start these negotiations. So this is the first Russian success. In my opinion, these talks will not bring any resolution to the stalemate, and rather we can we can expect that there is going to be some kind of military activity of Russia in Ukraine. I'm not thinking about the full-scale invasion, maybe some other forms of military engagement, but still, in my opinion, these talks are not going to bring us to any solution.
And Jan, what do you think? What is your opinion? What were the main reasons for the talks between the United States and Russia?
Of course, over the last decades, Russia has committed multiple acts of aggression against its neighbors. We speak about Georgia, we speak about Moldova, Ukraine, and right now let us focus on Ukraine, of course. And as you already mentioned, 2014 we had annexation of Crimea, but since then the war in Donbass have been waged. We have seen a growing number of Russian troops in the region. We saw Russian provocations, we saw conflicts with Russian separatists in this region, and hundreds of people died there, and we saw taking hostages, we saw swapping prisoners. So it's a real war out there. It's a real war out there, I would say. And of course, 2021, the Ukrainian administration and President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, actually emphasized that there are about 100,000 troops on the Russian-Ukrainian border. We speak about the south and the southeast of the country. So those were the main reasons, I would say, on why there were talks held in Geneva last Monday.
Yeah, well, the Russians have assured that they have no intention of invading Ukraine, and that the concentration of troops around Ukraine is only related to military exercises. So, Tomasz, what do you think? Will Russia withdraw its troops? And if not, what will be next? What we can expect?
Of course, this deployment of Russian soldiers has nothing to do with any kind of military drill. It is a mean of intimidation of the West. This is this gun that is put to the head of Kiev, but also to the head of the collective West. It is, I think, right now almost impossible to predict how the situation is going to develop, because I suppose that Russian administration, and particularly President Putin, after the last year, is strongly convinced that politics of force is successful. I mean, it is really profitable to push forward the political agenda using this means of hybrid warfare, not only like the strict military forces, but different means of hybrid warfare. Let's maybe do like a small summary of last 2 months. So February, this is the detention and imprisonment of Alexei Navalny, and almost no reaction of the Western community. In March, we observed the deployment of Russian forces in annexed Crimea and around occupied Donbass. At the same time, in the situation in Belarus has strongly deteriorated. The campaign of terror was started by President Lukashenko. In April, the airplane of Ryanair was captured was hijacked by regime of Lukashenko. In around May, June, the US administration announced that it's not going to impose any new sanction against Nord Stream 2. At the same time, the hybrid attack on Lithuanian and Polish border with Belarus has commenced. And finally, the energetic crisis in Europe has started in the fall of 2021. And definitely this crisis is facilitated by Russia. Also, Russia used was trying to intimidate Moldova using gas supplies. And finally, at the end of the year, the Memorial Association ceased to exist due to the decision of Russian Supreme Court. So during these 12 months, we observed like dozens of different means of internal and external pressure put by used by Kremlin administration, and unfortunately there were no any strong response from Western community, and that is the reason why President Putin can be can think that this politics of force is going to be also successful in the future. So, but to summarize, uh, if if there is a slight chance of full-scale invasion, I think that still there is a serious risk of, for instance, trying to exaggerate conflict in Donbass. Right now, of course, there is still conflict going on. I think it's important to remember that there is a front line in Donbass. There are people dying on daily basis, but still there is quite a big space for making this conflict more serious. Maybe there are going to be some deployments, for instance, in Mariupol, from maritime border. So yes, so Russia can use military force, not in a full scale, in some limited scope, but that there is a serious risk that Russia will try to destabilize Ukraine.
Thank you. And Jan, Tomasz already mentioned the demands of Russia during the talks, but what do you think? Are the Russian demands to exclude the eastern enlargement of the North Atlantic Treaty and to also withdraw troops from NATO countries bordering Russia, aren't they obvious?
I think it is obvious that the Russian Federation actually wants to keep its control over Ukraine. But also let us not forget that there is no US ambassador in Ukraine right now. And Joe Biden has not appointed anyone till today, actually. And in my opinion, these talks, if we talk about US and Russian administration talks in Geneva, I would say those are talks with terrorists, actually, because Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014, and now he demands in the through his administration, through his diplomacy, he demands some declarations from the US, from NATO. And I think it should be exactly opposite. It is the free world which actually should demand from Putin something. And what I remember, Leon Panetta, former CIA director and former US Secretary of Defense, said in 2016 that Putin's main interest is to restore the old USSR. And I think that's what we see right now, and we have seen it since many years ago. And right now, Putin seeks to divide NATO. He seeks to divide the European Union by his actions, by actions of his diplomacy. And we see demands of so-called ironclad declarations from the NATO, from the United States, that Ukraine will not join will not join NATO right now. And of course, we know it's unacceptable for the American side, for the United States. But of course, looking at Ukraine, we also can examine it as a, let's say, safety buffer on the map, both for the US and for Russia. But what is important to remember that it cannot work this way simultaneously. For Ukraine, for the United States, Ukraine is a place of raising influence. It's a place of building a potential alliance near American rivals, let's say. For NATO, it's a place for possible troops placement, which can be dangerous for Moscow, of course. And for Russia, it's a place of remoteness of this possible danger from the West. So the whole game right now it's like a chess game actually, goes on which side the Ukraine will be in the future. But as we already mentioned in our conversation, it's just the beginning of those talks. There are not any significant results right now. Yes, I think the talks will be conducted still, and the Ukrainian and European side needs to be included to those talks, and which also Antony Blinken said a few days ago, what said Deputy of Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who represented American diplomacy in Geneva on Monday. And I would expect Ukrainian and European sides to be included.
Yeah, well, I would say that the representatives of both sides said that those talks were quite successful, and even we can call them negotiations. But what do you think, guys? Can we consider the talks between the US and Russia as successful ones? Tomasz, what do you think?
I think right now there are no any signs of success. Of course, diplomats always after such a talks will announce at least some kind of success or some fields of potential cooperation and further negotiations. But I think we are far from for common stance between the US, NATO, and Russia. But I would like also to point out one, in my opinion, quite important thing. Let's see how the perspective of the situation in Ukraine has changed recently. A few months ago, let's say, not to think about a few years ago, we're thinking and discussing what to do to restore territorial integrity of Ukraine. What to do to compel Russia to withdraw its forces, or at least to withdraw support for pro-Russian separatists in Donbas. What to do with the Crimea? This annexation was illegal. For last 7 years, we are faced with the situation of infringement of international law, like very serious infringement of territorial integrity of Ukraine, and this was on the political agenda. What to do to help Ukraine regain the lands that are occupied by Russian forces, or at least by pro-Russian separatists. And right now we are discussing what to do to stop Russia from invading Ukraine with regular army. How to try to convince Putin not to attack, not to start the aggression against independent states, or shall we stop him with negotiations, or maybe with some kind of military, of course, not intervention from the West, but at least military backup, like providing armaments. And actually, President Putin is right now not talking what to do with the problem of occupied Donbas, but he's asking the West, okay, guys, what shall I do? Shall I grab the Ukraine by force or by negotiations? So the perspective has changed profoundly. We are at a totally different point from the one that we were 3 years ago, and it also, in my opinion, shows how successful this politics of force of Russia is. We right now should be discussing with Russia how Russia is thinking. What is Russia going to do with Crimea? Because this is, as I said, illegal annexation, but no, we are trying to convince Russia. Please not start shelling or airstrikes against Ukraine. So I think that the situation is really bad, and the position of collective West, but of not mentioning Central Europe, has profoundly deteriorated during last few years, but especially during last 12 months.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So Jan, what would you say? What is like the real reason behind the activities made by Putin? What do you think? Like, what he really wants to do? What is his aim?
As I already said, in the words of Leon Panetta, that Vladimir Putin also said it years before Panetta, that his main goal, his main aim is to restore the old Soviet Union, and that's what he does right now. I already mentioned Georgia, Moldova, we mentioned Ukraine right now. The whole activity of Russian foreign policy, activity of Vladimir Putin right now is just to restore the old USSR, and that's what he does. And of course, strong American influence in the region. If we talk about the eastern flank of NATO, if we talk about Ukraine, does not help him. And to be clear, it works just in opposite way. It is very not very good for him to achieve his goals of restoring the old USSR. Speaking back about the results of those negotiations, I would actually examine that there is no result of those negotiations right now. Wendy Sherman said after those meetings on Monday that she doesn't know if Russia really wants to withdraw their troops from the Ukrainian border. I don't really believe there is any result, no significant result of those talks. And of course, as an Americanist, I look at this from quite a different perspective, because I look at American diplomacy, and it looks rather poor, weak in those negotiations. I believe that Biden's administration will actually follow Barack Obama's footsteps also in this case, because we talk about this quote flexibility in talks with Russian Federation, which was conducted by Barack Obama and his administration. And right now we are kind of looking at the same picture with Biden as American president, as commander-in-chief in Washington. And for example, we see some similarities, for example, in shift to strong Germany position, domination European Union. European Union, in contrary to what, for example, Donald Trump did, who favored Free Seas Initiative. Actually, we see it in the removal of the U.S. troops from the Middle East last year. So I do believe that the United States of America under Joe Biden administration will actually conclude this, not only conclude, but conduct this politics of flexibility, which I already mentioned. And of course, speaking about the relations between the United States and the Russian Federation, we need to think a little broader, and we need to think about the relations with China, the People's Republic with China. And of course, the United States will still want to gain this Russian, let's call it benevolent neutrality in this conflict with China. So also because of that, I do not believe there will be any very strong actions from the side of Joe Biden administration towards Russia right now, and because the United States cannot afford and will not sacrifice the US-Russian relations in face of this bigger conflict or race of superpowers with the People's Republic of China.
Okay, well, it's not very optimistic when we're talking about sacrificing any nation, in case of this conflict. But well, the security discussions that took place on Monday were the first talking point this week in a series of meetings between Russia and the West, and the talks are continuing today between the Russia Council and NATO in Brussels, and there will be another session of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna on Thursday. And what do you expect from these talks, Tomasz? Also nothing, just friendly conversation between partners, or would it be a milestone?
To my mind, it's going to be rather maybe not a friendly conversation because definitely West and Russia are adversaries, but rather they are going to present totally different points of view. But in my opinion, I think that probably from Kremlin point of view, the most important uh, talks were the ones in Geneva. Why? Because what is Russia trying to do? What Russia actually loves are bilateral negotiations. So between superpowers, between the US as a superpower or great power and Russia, which would like to be perceived as a great power, even if taking into consideration Russian supplies, it's not it has not have a position for being a superpower. But anyway, Russia would like to talk with in bilateral format, not in the multilateral format. So direct talks with the US are most important ones. There were today's meeting of Russian NATO Council and the meeting of OC in Vienna are multilateral formats. So, from the Russian perspective, not so important. But I think we also really should focus on one more aspect. Thank you, Jan, for also mentioning this thing that Europe is there's a total absence of Europe in these negotiations. Actually, the negotiations about Europe take place without European Europe itself. Why? In my opinion, Kremlin doesn't consider European Union as a partner for this geopolitical game. Which might be quite surprising for us because we, as a members of the European Union, as a member of Europe, we would like to think about ourselves as the EU is an important international player. But from Kremlin perspective, it is not. And because Russia is traditionally Russia is counting tanks and aircrafts and airplanes and troops. And when we are starting counting armies of European states, it occurs that unfortunately our military potential is not so big. But what is even, I think, maybe more important, Russia is strongly considered that in Europe there is no political will for using armed forces, and there is no political will for stopping Russia from their malevolent activities. And I think there's some kind of quite common opinion in Russian elite that the European Union is no more a global political player, that it's not one of the great powers. So that is the reason why the European Union is right now on the sidetrack, which is, of course, something I think very and really worrying for us. So, from the European perspective, I think that this to start a strong discussion what has happened that during such an important diplomatic events, during the times of change, when potentially the fate of the part of the European Union as well is discussed, we are totally out of this format. What has happened to our politics that Russia is not considering us as a reliable and important player, that we are not considered as a game changer in this global chess. This is something which is, in my opinion, something that Europe really need to consider and consider it fast because right now we are on the side track between Russia and the US.
So, Jan, what would you say? What the leaders of the European Union should do? Not just to say, because we are very good in talking, however,
Okay.
not that good in in doing. So yeah, what the leaders should do.
Of course, I agree with Thomas that it's the bilateral style of negotiations that actually matters in this case. And of course, Russia will only respect power, and European Union does not have, for example, army does not have enough political and military power to be counted as a real rival, international rival for the Russian Federation. So the European Union leaders should just join the United States in those negotiations, but rather to be represented by the American administrations in this discourse, in those talks. And of course, I do believe it's just the beginning of negotiations on the issue of Ukraine, because after the first meeting on Monday, there was no real results. There was no bigger declarations. Everything was very slack, not very accurate. And in this case, I would rather prepare for a long run in diplomatic action, in diplomatic dispute. I would not expect any breaking through results in the nearest future if we talk about Ukraine. Also, I do not believe that the Russian Federation will use its maximum power of 100,000 troops right now, because Russia weighs the stakes. And will not take any impulsive action right now when they know that Ukraine is strongly backed by Americans. We know that in late December, Joe Biden signed another bill which added $200 million in military assistance, security assistance to Ukraine. So I would rather say that Europe should join American side of negotiation, of course, but they should rather work to be represented in bilateral style of negotiations by American diplomacy.
And last but not least, what should be the reaction of NATO and the United States in case Russia attacks Ukraine, Tomasz?
Okay, in the dream scenario, of course, I would say that NATO is going to support Ukraine, at least with profound military and profound supplies of armaments and munition, but also with support of military instructors. But I am afraid it's probably not going to happen. Right now, the US administration is talking about very serious sanctions against Russia, including cutting Russia off from the SWIFT system, even though this is quite disputable if the US administration is really ready to use this nuclear sanction option. I will definitely agree with Jan that probably we should be prepared for this long run, long negotiations. But I think that Russia can maybe try to put more pressure on West, starting some, as I also said before, smaller, limited military activities. For instance, in Donbass or in Mariupol, or trying to use another group of separatists, for instance, let's say in Kharkiv, of trying to put the pressure on Ukrainian Belarusian border. So there are different directions in which Russia can attack without this full scale operation, but trying to show the US that they are really ready to use military force, because when you take the gun, you need to convince the person that you are intimidating that you are ready to shoot, because if you are not shooting,
Yeah.
you are not a reliable terrorist. and Russia don't want to be unreliable. Russia would like to be perceived as country determined to use force if only it is if only it is profitable, as Russia actually did in Kazakhstan. I think that it was also sending signal to the West. See, there is color revolution, as Kremlin calls it, and we are ready to send our troops within 48 hours. We are ready to start this blitzkrieg to stop stop protesters and to bring back the order, as they claim it, to Kazakhstan.
Yeah, exactly. And Jan, how would you answer the question? Like, what should be the reaction of NATO and the United States in case Russia attacks Ukraine?
As I already said, this safety buffer, which could work for the West, for the NATO, and for the United States of America, this safety buffer should be taken care of. But of course, as Joe Biden already mentioned, he will not send American troops to Ukraine. Also, members of NATO will not be obliged to help Ukraine when this country will be attacked by or could be attacked by the Russian Federation, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO right now, and they are not obliged to do that. But of course, what can be done in the Ukrainian case, of course, is this military assistance, military aid conducted by the United States. I told you about $200 million aid, which was signed in late December last year by Joe Biden. And I believe right now this is the only way to support Ukrainian soldiers, for example, in the east, if we talk about Donbas, Crimea, and fights with Russian separatists. But at the same time, we can tell about Secretary of State Antony Blinken's words, who said that only the escalation in this region will actually make progress in those talks with Russia. So we are, without any doubt, we are in tough situations right now. But I do believe that the best solution right now for Ukraine and for the West is just supporting Ukrainian troops fighting those little or maybe a little bigger Russian groups of soldiers in the east, just to uphold this state of Ukrainians fight not to be submitted to Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Tomasz. Thank you, Jan. Thank you for finding time and taking part in our event today. And I would like to encourage the viewers, the followers, to follow our work on Facebook, on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.